Deborah Fleischaker is former chief of staff at ICE and former executive secretary for DHS. Badria Arandano is the former chief of police in Minneapolis. Okay, Deborah, how do you expect swapping out Bovino for Homan might change things on the ground in Minneapolis?
Well, I hope this changes things, but my real concern is that it's a swap of packaging and not of what's inside the package, right? What we really need is a change of goal, tactics, and approach, and simply switching out leadership or even moving Border Patrol agents out and leaving ICE agents, at the numbers we're seeing isn't really a de-escalation.
So, Chief Arandano, what do you see as change that would make a difference? You just heard Deborah mention goal, tactics, approach. Do you agree with that? And what does that mean in reality?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for having me. And absolutely, my friend Deborah is absolutely spot on. You know, the key four things that I see in terms of what's going to have to make a change here on the ground in Minneapolis is one, will the border czar now, Tom Homan, have that open communication with local, county, and state officials that has not been in place yet? The second thing is what Deborah alluded to is the tactics. None of this will matter if the same viral videos are continuing to be shared throughout the country of mothers being dragged out of cars, if obviously the murder, the shooting death of Miss Renee Good, the killing of Alex Preddy, if those tactics don't change, nothing is going to change in terms of the temperature. The other thing is, when is this over? Every sort of operation has a timeline. Is Operation Metro Surge? What are the benchmarks in order for that to end? And then lastly, are there going to be both a concurrent internal review of policy, training, and procedures of those ICE agents involved in both the killing of Miss Good and Mr. Preddy, and also will there be a concurrent criminal investigation ensuring that their constitutional rights were not violated?
So we just got a statement, and I'm going to go to you with this, David, from the office of Governor Walz. And he says he met with Tom Homan and reiterated the priorities that Minnesota has, and this is what they are. Impartial investigations into the Minneapolis shootings involving federal agents, a swift, significant reduction in the number of federal forces in Minnesota, an end to the campaign of retribution against Minnesota. And the governor has put the Minnesota Department of Public Safety as the primary liaison to Homan to make sure that these goals are met. But you are, as you have been on the ground, what's the mood there, and how difficult will it be to convince people that things will turn around?
It won't be easy to convince them, Chris, because to be honest, the sentiment that I've been hearing most since yesterday, when this potential, turnaround in the political approach that the White House is taking to this issue has been one of skepticism. On the one hand, people are happy to see Greg Bovino go. They understand that Greg Bovino was responsible for a lot of the outlandishly aggressive tactics that we've seen from both ICE and Border Patrol agents on the ground. Not just here in Minneapolis, but in other American cities since these operations started last summer. So Bovino leaving seems to suggest that maybe there is, in fact, a limit to what the Trump administration is willing to do in terms of the aggressiveness of its immigration enforcement practices. Some people are hopeful that the community response and the widespread, the sort of depth and breadth of the community response to this is potentially responsible for achieving this as a political goal. Now, to speak to the scale of that response, yesterday we spoke to you, Chris, from a local church that was gathering food donations and delivering them to immigrant families that were sheltering in place. We spoke to the pastor of that church. I asked him to give me a sense of the scale of how many people he and his church were helping. Listen to what he said.
100,000 people that have asked us for help.
100,000 people?
Over 100,000 people. We have close to 28,000 families. You multiply that by 4, being conservative in our Latino community. Right. So we have, and we also have Native Americans and veterans from the Army as well. But yeah, that's a humanitarian crisis that ICE have created here in Minnesota.
What this speaks to, in a larger sense, Chris, is the fact that this is a city where it wasn't just a sort of core of ideologically committed activists and organizers who did the work of responding to what they were seeing from federal authorities. Those people were, of course, involved and critical in organizing what we saw, but there was a very broad-based and diverse response from multiple elements of the community. I've spoken to a number of people who never engaged in this kind of direct organizing, on-the-ground organizing, mutual aid work, rapid response work, but are now doing it because they heard that, immigrant kids at their kids' school were afraid and felt that they were in danger. The extent of the community response here, I think people assume has something to do with the response and the change in tune that we're getting from the White House. But people are also extremely skeptical. Among other things, one thing that I've heard from a few people is, the idea that Tom Homan, of all people, a notorious immigration hardliner, the face in many ways of the Trump administration's mass deportation policy, would be the sort of moderate or rational voice in this, is making people wonder how much change we're actually going to see in terms of how many agents are going to be sent home, to what extent is there going to be a change in the tactics that we see on the ground, to what extent is there going to be a de-escalation in the threats of investigation, the threats of retaliation the community organizers have been receiving for this work, and so on. So people are very cautiously hopeful, but also very skeptical, Chris.
The real field temperature there, according to my app, is -10. Thank you for being there for us, David Noriega. And I see there are also people gathering there as well. Deborah, I think when you talk about, rightfully, both you and the chief, how difficult it's going to be to convince people that you can turn things around. I think the mayor of St. Paul, who was on this network last night, explained why. Take a listen.
Unless there's going to be more clear identification of who and what they were here to actually try to do, I don't know if there's going to be the security that people will have or that they can feel hopeful. And so you can remove one or two of them, but the fundamentals of the Supreme Court giving them free rein to profile people by the way that they look or the way that they sound. They're being told that they can still operate with immunity. Those things haven't changed, regardless of who you remove out of our cities here.
So let's go back to when you were in ICE, if we can, Deborah. And if you were in a situation where ICE is sent into a city, and they're in cities all the time, they were in Minneapolis before this operation began, what would be typical practice here? And do you think it's possible to go back to it?
Absolutely. Look, when I was at ICE, ICE enforcement was around the country. It has always been around the country. It should be around the country in its various field offices. That doesn't mean that we should be doing massive community sweeps and federal presence like what we're seeing now. ICE could go back to doing targeted, careful, planned enforcement operations against public safety threats and national security threats. They could do that today. So there is no reason to think that the promises that we're hearing mean much until we see that kind of walk back and de-escalation in their approach.
And beyond the de-escalation, Chief, there is the call for transparency. Everyone from the governor on down agrees there needs to be an investigation into the killings of both Alex Preddy and Renee Good. The DHS confirmed to MS Now yesterday that there is body cam footage of the killing, in addition to what I think pretty much all of us have seen multiple times from many different angles. Should that be released to the public in the interest of transparency?
I absolutely think it would be very helpful, and it should be released at some point in time to the public. Obviously, one of the reasons why we're at this place now, Chris, is the fact that those initial statements from DHS, whether it was after the killing of Miss Good, and certainly the statements that were made within hours after the killing of Mr. Preddy, that has created a lot of this fear, uncertainty, and quite frankly, some of the anger. And so there's been an erosion of trust right now with the federal footprint that's on the ground in Minneapolis. And so, yes, I think that if there are ways to make sure that evidence can, or at least the transparency of that come out there, I think it's going to be very important. It was just the other day that America saw the picture of what is alleged to be Mr. Preddy's handgun in a car seat. If that is important enough to get to the public, I think that if there's parts of that body-worn camera footage that can be shared as well to the public, then they should absolutely consider that.
And Chief, we should also note that even if the president seems to be softening his tone, and that's the indication we got from the governor that the tone of the conversations have changed, his press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, does not appear to be. Take a listen to this.
This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota. For weeks, Governor Walz and the Mayor Jacob Fry and other elected Democrats were spreading lies about federal law enforcement officers who are risking their lives daily to remove the worst criminal illegal aliens from our streets.
And I guess that includes the 5-year-old little boy whose picture went viral as he was standing and after his father had been swept up. So what do you think when you hear that the message is to federal officers? Is it to ease up on their approach or not?
Well, I think it hopefully will go back to Deborah's point that they can still conduct the work that they need to do. They've been doing it for years in Minneapolis, but it has to be professional. It has to be targeted. The current optics that are coming out of Minneapolis are not in alignment with what others in DHS are saying that they're doing. And so, again, they've been here. They will continue to operate in cities across the country. It's just that the manner in which they've been doing it in Minneapolis has been called into question.